Let's begin with a question that may sound simple, but if you let it settle deep into your consciousness, it will begin to shift the very architecture of your life. What if everything you've experienced until now was just the beginning? What if the limitations you've accepted, your past, your pain, your perceived identity, were never the end of your story, but only the raw material God would use to shape something extraordinary? See, we've been conditioned to believe that life is cause and effect, that we are who we are because of what has happened to us, that we must drag our past into our future as if it defines what's possible for us. But what if that's not the truth? What if instead of being defined by our history, we could be redefined by vision? Because I want you to hear this, God has so much more for you. But, and this is key, He requires your trust, not just a passive, wishful, emotional kind of trust, but a biological, neurological, spiritual alignment. A trust that changes your thoughts, alters your feelings, and calibrates your body into a new state of being. Science tells us the brain doesn't know the difference between a memory and a vision of the future, if you feel it deeply enough. When you begin to emotionally experience your future as if it's already real, you rewire your brain, you recondition your body, you activate dormant systems within you, systems that are divine in origin. And here's where the spiritual meets the physiological. God placed within you the capacity to change, to heal, to create, to transcend. But too often we limit what God can do in our lives because we continue to dwell in the emotional signatures of fear, lack, and doubt. We wake up every morning expecting yesterday. We pray, but then live in worry. We say we believe, but then prepare for disappointment. That's not trust. Trust is when you begin to embody the future God has promised before you see it. It means learning to live from the elevated emotions of faith, gratitude, wholeness, and joy. Not because your circumstances justify them, but because your belief in God's promise is stronger than your memory of the past. When you elevate your internal state, when you align with His vision rather than your history, you open the door for divine intelligence to move. You no longer pray for a miracle, you become the miracle. Your body responds, your relationships shift, doors open, resources come. And it's not coincidence, it's coherence, because God is not bound by time. His more for you already exists. It's not something you have to beg for, it's something you have to tune into. So the question becomes, are you willing to surrender your old self, the familiar pain, the conditioned fear, the story of limitation, in order to step into the unknown with God? Because the unknown is where the more is. The unknown is where the healing lives. The unknown is where the calling activates. The unknown is where God's power is not limited by your logic, but it requires trust, radical trust. So today, as you breathe, as you think, as you feel, begin to practice the future God has placed in your heart. Don't just think about it. Feel it, be it. And then watch what happens when heaven finds a body on earth that's finally ready to receive. God has so much more for you if you will trust Him. God has more for you than your current reality reflects. Most people live within the boundaries of what they can see, touch, and measure. They evaluate their life based on their current circumstances, bank accounts, relationships, health conditions, status. But this physical reality is not the full story. It's simply a snapshot, a delayed printout of past thoughts, beliefs, and emotional patterns. In truth, the external world is a mirror of our inner world. What you see around you today was shaped by the thoughts and feelings you repeated yesterday. And yet, we often mistake this temporary state as permanent, forgetting that God operates beyond time and beyond the limitations of what the senses can perceive. There is a greater plan, a higher dimension of potential already established for you. But it requires spiritual awareness to recognize it. God's vision for you is not bound by your current job title, the trauma in your past, or the diagnosis you've received. He sees you through the lens of destiny, not history. And when you understand that your current reality is not the limit of what's possible, something begins to awaken within you. Hope, faith, expectancy. That shift in perception is critical, because if you continue to identify with what is, you'll keep recreating more of it. But if you begin to emotionally and spiritually engage with what could be, you open the door to transformation. This is not wishful thinking. It's aligning your heart and mind with a reality that already exists in the mind of God. What you're experiencing now is not the ceiling. It's the ground floor. Your present limitations are not a reflection of divine will. They're simply feedback, pointing to the need for internal change. There is more available. So much more. Your past does not define your future. Your vision does. Too often, people carry their past like an identity badge, replaying memories of failure, betrayal, or missed opportunities as if those moments are permanent fixtures in who they are. The mind becomes addicted to the familiar emotions of shame, regret, or limitation, and without realizing it, individuals begin to predict their future based on what they've already experienced. They expect the same outcomes, the same struggles, the same cycles. But God did not create you to live in repetition. He created you for transformation. The past is real, but it is not sovereign. It holds facts, not authority. It has shaped you, but it was never meant to confine you. Vision is what breaks the cycle. When you allow yourself to imagine a future that looks different from your history, and when you feel that future so deeply that your body begins to respond to it, you are no longer just surviving time. You are shaping destiny. Vision is spiritual sight. It's the ability to hold in your heart something your eyes cannot yet see, and to trust that it's more real than the scars of what came before. God responds to vision because vision is faith in motion. When you create space in your thoughts for what He has shown you in your spirit, you shift from reaction to creation. You stop reliving old patterns and start rehearsing new possibilities. The neural pathways in your brain begin to rewire. The emotional addiction to your past starts to loosen. And little by little, you become a different person, not because you've run from your past, but because you've chosen to live according to what's ahead. The more vividly you hold the vision, the less power the past has over you. Trust is not passive. It's a transformative state of being. Many people claim to trust God, but their lives are still ruled by anxiety, control, and fear. They pray for breakthrough, but prepare for disappointment. They speak words of faith while their internal state remains locked in survival mode. True trust is not something you say, it's something you embody. It's not a fleeting emotion. It's a biological, emotional, and spiritual realignment. When you truly trust, your nervous system relaxes, your thoughts settle, and your energy shifts into coherence with what you believe is coming. Trust transforms you because it positions you to receive. In the absence of trust, you grip tightly to your surroundings, trying to manipulate outcomes and force certainty. But trust requires surrender, not as weakness, but as the deepest kind of strength. It means letting go of the need to control how and when God will move, and choosing instead to align with the belief that He already is. This alignment isn't passive, it's deeply intentional. It requires you to monitor your inner world, to catch the fear before it takes root, and to choose a different state, one that resonates with divine timing and unseen possibilities. Trust is also action. It is how you speak, how you move, how you decide in the face of uncertainty. When you truly trust, you make choices based not on your past experiences, but on the future you believe God has promised. That kind of trust rewires your internal chemistry. It draws new patterns into your life because you are no longer vibrating with fear, you're vibrating with expectation. Every time you return to a state of trust, even when your senses tempt you otherwise, you create space for the supernatural to become tangible and for the unknown to become reality. Your brain changes when you emotionally live your future now. Most people wait for something external to shift before they allow themselves to feel differently. They wait for the breakthrough, the relationship, the healing, or the opportunity before they give themselves permission to feel joy, peace, or gratitude. But this approach keeps them locked in a cycle of reaction. The truth is, your brain doesn't know the difference between an actual experience and a vividly imagined one, if the emotion is real enough. When you begin to emotionally rehearse a future that aligns with God's promise, your brain starts to build new neural pathways as if that future is already happening. This is more than visualization, it's embodiment. When you create a clear and elevated internal state, gratitude for what hasn't arrived yet, peace about outcomes you can't control, joy rooted in faith rather than facts, you literally shift your biology. You move from survival into creation. You stop reinforcing the neural networks of the past and begin constructing a mental and emotional architecture that matches the future God has shown you. As these neural pathways strengthen, your identity starts to shift. You no longer identify with limitation or lack. You begin to identify with the version of you who is already living in alignment with divine abundance. This is where transformation becomes sustainable. It's not about motivation or willpower. It's about changing your internal chemistry to match the reality you believe in. Over time, your body begins to memorize and when your internal environment consistently reflects the future instead of the familiar, your external world has no choice but to begin rearranging itself to reflect that coherence. Your thoughts, feelings, and actions become the bridge between the invisible and the physical, between God's intention and your lived experience. That divine potential is activated through elevated emotion. You were created with the capacity to reflect the nature of God, not just through action, but through the energy you carry. Emotions are not just reactions to external events. They are powerful signals that shape your frequency, your biology, and your reality. When you live in elevated emotional states like gratitude, love, joy, inspiration, and peace, you open up energetic pathways that allow divine potential to move freely through you. These states are not just spiritual, they are physiological. They change your brain waves, alter your heart rhythm, and shift your hormonal chemistry toward healing and creation. Most people unknowingly live in states of survival: fear, anger, guilt, unworthiness. These emotions are not bad, but when repeated and sustained, they lock the body into a pattern that signals threat. In that state, the mind focuses on the immediate, the predictable, the known. The problem is that the life God has for you isn't found in the predictable. It's found in the unknown. And to access it, your internal state must be greater than your external circumstances. Elevated emotions create coherence between your heart and brain. And in that harmony, you become receptive to inspiration, intuition, and divine direction. This is how you align with God's amore for your life. Not by striving harder, but by learning to live from an internal environment that reflects His nature. You can't attract peace if your body is addicted to stress. You can't create abundance if your emotions are rooted in lack. But when you consistently return to elevated states, even in the face of contradiction, you become a vessel that carries the frequency of heaven. This is where divine potential becomes active, where your thoughts and feelings begin to mirror the creative force of the one who designed you. Fear and doubt block what God wants to release. These emotions, though common and often justified by experience, act as energetic barriers that disrupt the flow of divine intention in your life. When you live in a chronic state of fear of failure, rejection, loss, or the unknown, you close off the part of your heart and mind that needs to remain open for faith to function. Fear narrows perception, making it impossible to see opportunity, and doubt suppresses the internal authority God has already placed within you. Together, they create resistance between your current self and the future God desires to unfold. God moves in freedom, not restriction. He calls you into a reality where trust is greater than logic and possibility is greater than history. But when you dwell in fear, your nervous system stays in a constant loop of survival. This loop reinforces past trauma, magnifies uncertainty, and silences the intuitive voice of the spirit. Doubt, meanwhile, interrupts the creative process by keeping your focus fixed on what could go wrong instead of what God has promised. These states disconnect you from the elevated emotions, love, faith, gratitude that are necessary to activate spiritual alignment. On a biological level, fear and doubt increase stress hormones, disrupt coherence between your brain and heart, and weaken the body's ability to heal and regenerate. Spiritually, they dull your sensitivity to divine guidance. You may continue praying and declaring truth, but if fear is your dominant state, your inner world remains out of sync with the very things you're asking for. The more you entertain fear, the more you rehearse separation rather than connect. The more you tolerate doubt, the more you train your mind to anticipate disappointment instead of breakthrough. These patterns must be broken if you're going to walk in what's already prepared for you. God's faith requires stepping into the unknown. This is where the tension exists between what is and what could be. It's easy to stay in familiar territory where things are predictable, comfortable, and known. But the journey of faith asks you to step outside the borders of the familiar into a place where there are no guarantees, no visible signs of success, and no assurance of control. In that space, your trust in God becomes your greatest asset. Faith by nature involves a leap into what the senses cannot confirm, a belief in what is not yet seen but fully hoped for. This is the very essence of God's invitation. He calls you to surrender your need to understand and to move in alignment with His plan, even when it doesn't make sense. The unknown is not a place of chaos, but of possibility. It's in the unknown that the divine can truly show up. If you only walk in places you've already been, you'll never encounter the vastness of what God has designed for you. The unknown is where growth happens. It's where the miracle is waiting. Faith is not simply believing in the abstract. It's taking action based on what you believe. You cannot access the fullness of God's provision, peace, or promise by clinging to what's comfortable. You must move beyond the walls of fear and into the expanse of potential. When you step into the unknown, you create a space for God to work in ways you couldn't have imagined while clinging to the familiar. It's in that space where new possibilities are birthed, where your deepest desires, your greatest gifts, and your true calling are waiting to be discovered. Faith doesn't mean certainty. It means surrendering to the process of becoming who you were always meant to be. You don't wait for miracles. You align to become one. Miracles are not isolated events that happen to a chosen few. They are the natural result of divine alignment. When you live in alignment with God's plan for your life, you become a vessel through which the extraordinary can manifest. The idea of waiting for a miracle often stems from a belief that something outside of you must change before your life can transform. But the truth is, the miracle is already within you. It's not an external event. It's the state of your heart, mind, and spirit that allows you to tap into the unseen potential that God has already provided. Alignment begins. It starts when you adjust your internal state to reflect what you know in your spirit, that you are worthy, that God's promise is true, and that His provision is abundant. As you align your thoughts, emotions, and actions with this truth, you begin to shift your energy. Your body responds. Your actions become intentional, moving you in the direction of your divine purpose. You stop waiting for a miracle to fall from the sky and start becoming the miracle, living as if the breakthrough has already happened, thinking as if your desires have already been fulfilled, acting as though you are already walking in the fullness of God's blessings. Miracles occur when you are so aligned with divine possibility that what seemed impossible becomes inevitable. As you embody your true nature, the supernatural becomes natural. The impossible door opens, the healing takes place, the breakthrough is manifested, because you've been prepared to receive it, not through passive waiting, but through active alignment with what God has already destined for you. This is the true power of faith in action. God's plan already exists. You must tune into it. The future you desire, the vision you hold, the life you're meant to live, it's all been preordained by God. His will for you is not something you have to beg for, strive for, or force into existence. It's already laid out, written in the fabric of the universe, waiting for you to align with it. Too often, we look at our current circumstances and feel disconnected from the life we know is possible. We focus on what's lacking, what hasn't manifested, and we start to believe that our desired future is far off, hard to reach, or even out of our grasp. But the truth is, God has already provided everything you need to fulfill His purpose in your life. His plan is complete, and the path to it is already in motion. The challenge is not about making something happen. It's about tuning into what already is. It's about cultivating a deeper awareness of the divine signals that are guiding you. When you open your heart and mind, when you clear away the distractions, you begin to see the subtle ways God is already at work. His plan unfolds not through force, but through surrender and trust. This is where faith and intuition enter. When you are attuned to the divine frequency, when you stop striving against the current, you start to recognize the small nudges, the subtle shifts, the opportunities that align with God's will. You don't need to control how or when things will unfold. You simply need to stay tuned to the divine rhythm, trusting that everything is moving towards your greater good. Your job is to listen, follow, and walk in faith, knowing that the plan is already in motion, and all you need to do is step into it. Radical trust unlocks supernatural transformation. Trusting God at the deepest level requires a shift that goes beyond surface-level belief or passive hope. It's not about simply agreeing with the idea that God is in control. It's about fully surrendering to the process, regardless of how unpredictable, uncomfortable, or uncertain it may seem. Radical trust means releasing the need to understand every step, every outcome, and every detail of how God's plan will unfold. Instead, it's an unwavering belief that God's intentions for you are always good, always aligned with your highest potential, and always working for your benefit, even when you cannot see the bigger picture. This kind of trust is transformative because it doesn't just change your thoughts, it changes your very being. When you trust radically, you stop reacting to life with fear, doubt, or control. You begin to respond from a place of peace, knowing that the unseen is working in your favor. This internal shift ripples outward, impacting every aspect of your life. Your decisions change, your perspective shifts, and your actions align with faith rather than fear. The more you trust, the more you create a flow of divine energy that bypasses limitations and ushers in possibilities that you could never have predicted or created on your own. Radical trust is also a choice, a daily moment-by-moment decision to believe that God is in control, even when the evidence in front of you seems to say otherwise. The more you practice this trust, the more you begin to see miraculous changes, not just in your circumstances, but in your heart, your mind, and your body. You start to notice doors opening, opportunities presenting themselves, and breakthroughs happening because you've chosen to trust in God's sovereignty and His timing. This trust is the key that unlocks the power of divine transformation.